We're going to continue on in our study of the book of Job. We just began to introduce Job last week. Looked at just a few statements about the mystery of Job, the fact that it really is a book that you wonder, why did it take 34 chapters to basically say it's your fault? No, it's not, which is the argument of chapter 4 on to chapter 37. We're going to continue on with that introduction and look at some of the background, the purpose of the book, and some of the themes that we're going to be identifying as we go through our study. So, as you look at some of the background elements of this very wonderful book, it's hard to understand in a lot of ways. It raises a lot of questions in a lot of ways. But nonetheless, as you go through it and you study it, it is a wonderful book to look at. And the experience that this book recounts is very old. The oral recounting of Job's experience may go as far back in time as the section, and this is when we look at the background, look at the time frame, FRA, time frame of the original experience of Job probably fits in somewhere Genesis 10 through 12. Because Job lived at least, at the latest, he lived probably around the time of Abraham or before. So the only time frame we can really put with that is from the Tower of Babel, chapter 10, to chapter 12. How long that period of time was, we don't really know, but somewhere in that period of time. So the actual experience of Job may be the oldest account next to the account of the fall of man that we have in Scripture. Job could very well be that old a book. Certainly, at least, the book is 4,500, 5,000 years old. It recounts a story at least that old, if not thousands of years before that. Well, we can't say for sure, but that's as far as a scriptural place of the events of Job probably. The writing of the book probably took place much later on. Most of the commentators give several ideas as to who wrote the book, but the Jews looked at it that Moses probably was the author of the book. It's not stated. The author is never stated in the book. Some have given that Elihu, who speaks at the end of the book, may have been a writer. He doesn't include his name until the end of the book, and that's kind of like John's gospel. John wrote the Gospel of John, but really didn't ever say he was writing it until you get right at the end of the book, that he who witnessed these things wrote these things down. So it could be something like that. And there are others that, give other sources of the book. Probably Moses would be the most likely, although can't really prove it one way or the other. So, the inspiration of the book, it's interesting that with, wondering who wrote it, and it being as old as it is, the Jews never questioned this book's inspiration. It never was an argument. It never was a concern. It never was even an issue. It was so that, once again, may give some credence to the fact that Moses wrote the book, so the Jews would automatically give it that sense of authority. But it's quite interesting that as old as this story is, it was never questioned as to whether this is a real account and that it was inspired by God. So, some other references that we have of Job in Scripture that help validate that it is a real experience. It's not just a story or a fairy tale that has, some kind of happy ending. Is that Job is referred to in Ezekiel chapter 14, verses 14 and verses 20, where the Lord is speaking to Ezekiel, and he's saying that even if Daniel and Job were praying for Israel, they wouldn't be able to change what was about to happen, which was the fall and the complete destruction of the land. And he makes mention of that twice. So Job is included. And James chapter 5, verse 11, is a familiar passage about Job. You've all heard of the patience of Job is in the Lord, that type of thing. And there's a passage quoted by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 19, that comes from chapter 5 of Job, verse 13. So the book has been quoted, it was accepted all through, and it was well enough to be well enough known well enough to be quoted during the Babylonian captivity. It kind of gives some credence to the fact that this book was well known and never questioned as being a message from God to the people. Now, Job lived, as we've talked about a little bit, in the land of Uz. Or as Scott said this morning, we're going to hear about the land of Oz. But the land of Uz. And not only he, but his 3 friends, which, if you have friends like that, you really don't need any enemies, along with Elihu. And Uz is best probably located in an area south and east of Canaan, probably in the area around northern Arabia. And Job was probably kind of a nomad like Abraham. Abraham was very rich, had a lot of flocks and so forth. Job the same. And he moved within that area of what is known now as the Middle East. So northern Arabia, and between there and Canaan, the land of Edom it came to be known. So right in that area is where Uz probably was. Now, when we think about the purpose of the book, why was the book written? What's this book about? The presence of suffering in this earthly life is never a subject of debate in the book of Job. It is automatically assumed. There is a presumption on the part of Job's companions that he's going to be talking to through this book, at least in their minds, that it was possible to avoid most, if not all, suffering. And if you do have suffering, it's your fault. You've done something to deserve this. And it was this belief or rejection of this belief that really forms the debate of the book of Job. This is what the whole book of Job really, covers in the dialogue between Job and all these guys. So, I want to ask a question. What is the relevance of Job to you? What's the relevance of Job to you? How many of you read the book of Job? Anybody? Yeah, most of you. Yeah, okay. And when was the last time that you actually looked into the book of Job for wisdom and insight?
When my parents passed away.
Okay, yeah. Within the last couple of years, as a matter of fact. Yeah, okay. Anybody else? Refer to the book of Job very often for wisdom and insight.
I think it's an example of suffering without understanding.
Okay. Yeah, suffering without understanding. Okay, we can put what is the relevance of Job to us.
We'll have to talk a little louder.
Right.
Sorry.
What is the relevance of Job to us?
I turned the air conditioner down a while ago.
Okay. So, it is one thing, it's suffering without understanding. And Kim and Eric, this is as good as it gets right here. So if you can't read it, don't worry. Nobody else has been able to read it in 5 years. So just so you'll know. Just so you know.
This is as good as it gets.
This is as good as it gets. So what else? What's the relevance of Job to you? What does the book mean? We very seldom go to this book for wisdom and insight. We'll read Proverbs. We'll go to the to the epistles of Paul, we'll read the Gospels. But by and large, Job is one of those books that, yeah, it's in the Bible, and there have been times, but by and large, yeah, it's in the Bible. And that's about the extent of it. So what does the book mean to you?
That when you have nothing left but God, that's enough.
Okay. When you have nothing left but God, that's enough. Okay. What else?
It directly applies to my life in particular,
Okay.
to the letter.
Okay. So it has a direct relation to individual lives. Okay. Now, so as we think about Job, what's the purpose of the book of Job? Okay, these are great things to see as to the relevance of this book into our life. And I think all this goes to part of what the aim of God was in having Job's experience recorded. To me, the key to understanding the purpose of God in having Job written is probably best captured by James, in James chapter 5, verse 11. Now, in that passage, NIV says, you've heard of the perseverance of Job. King James Version has, patience. I really like the idea of perseverance better than patience. The Greek word behind that is a word, it's a compound word, it's hupomeno, which basically means under and to abide. Hupo means under, meno means to abide. And as one commentator noted, the word hupomeno used by James chapter 5 verse 11 expresses a determination to face a particular trial or series of trials without flinching. And I think that's the key. Job presents us with a man who had determination in the face of trials without flinching. Now, his flinching wasn't against God. He didn't understand. He complained. He growled about it. But he never charged God with sin, of doing him wrong. He didn't understand what was going on. And he maintained that integrity all the way through the book. And I think that's one of the keys to understanding that Job really gives us someone who stood it. Who stood and took virtually the worst that could be thrown at you and didn't break. Now, and that's pretty powerful. I can't say that. I can't say that. There's been too many times that I kind of, in the midst of some stuff that I've gone through where I should have been like that, I was more like this, or I was really just kind of broke like that. Job was more like this. And that serves as an example. It serves as a stimulus, as an encouragement to us. And I think that's probably one of the keys into why Job was written. And it goes right into the things that you have noted here. Another commentator noted that he saw or sees the book of Job, and I really like this, is that its key message is, how can I suffer? It's not if I'm going to suffer, because I am. Most of us are going to run into something in life that's going to kind of throw us. And he says, how can I suffer? What am I to do when I am suffering? In what spirit can I go on suffering? And I think that really, to me, kind of hits home as you think about what the purpose of Job was and continues to be. Job gives to us some practical examples that give us wisdom in the midst of trying times. As you read it and you see what he went through, You see how he responded. You see how the Lord was, where God was in all of this. It really, can share wisdom as to the positive side of it, as well as some things not to do in our suffering. So I really kind of like the idea of Job talks about how can I suffer. Because it's a given. It's never a question of if we're going to suffer. So how can I go through it? You get a diagnosis tomorrow of cancer. How am I going to deal with that? You get another diagnosis tomorrow, Alzheimer's. How are you going to deal with that? Things that throw you. Do what? You won't remember it, yeah. That's the positive side of looking at it, Whatever goes on, you're not going to remember it anyway. Yeah. So, and that's looking on the bright side in an extreme right there, What did the doctor tell you? I can't remember. Oh, I know what it is then, Yeah, see, we can just go downhill so fast. But how do we handle all those things? How do you handle it when, something happens to your parents, something happens to your children, something happens to your spouse? All of those things. Maybe it doesn't directly touch us, but it indirectly touches us because it happens to somebody that's close. And Job can give us some wisdom on just how do I suffer? How do I go through this? How can I handle this? And I think James also gives us a companion purpose of Job. Because James goes on in that verse 11 of chapter 5, and he says that you realize and you remember and you've seen what the Lord finally brought about. New International Version. King James, I think, reads, you saw the end of the Lord. That the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. And this is a companion purpose, that there is in God a response to our pain that goes beyond the depth of hurt we may face here. Certainly James is speaking probably of the ultimate response of God, that whatever we go through here, once we get a glimpse of him there, you're going to forget everything down here that you went through. He will say, that was bad, look at what I got. But at the same time, I think that there are waves of love and mercy and compassion that wash over us in this life as well. And I think the companion point to the book of Job, looking at purpose, is that the Lord will not forget us. Even though everyone and everything says he has. I think that is one of the purposes of the book of Job. So, questions, comments, before we move on to some of the things we'll look at? So, as we think about this general purpose, and these two elements, that the wisdom that Job gives us on how we can suffer, and the end of the Lord, in other words, that God doesn't forget us in the middle of all these things. There are a number of themes that we're going to look at as we go into the book. So, and we'll see these primarily, we'll see them mostly in chapters 1 and 2, and then toward the end of the book. And that's where we'll spend most of our time, is in these sections, for sure. But some of the things that we're going to look at is that there is a backstory in our sufferings that we, more often than not, are not aware. And as a subset to this backstory is the fact that there is suffering that comes to us because we are believers. Job's whole deal was because he was a believer. And he never knew that. The Lord never did tell him. That we know of. Not recorded in the book anyway. So there's a backstory for what happens in our lives, and the occurrences, the situations, the crises, the hurts, the so forth, that we're not aware of what that backstory is. What is it in the overarching providence of God that He knows this point right here is necessary in that overarching work that to us, certainly for Job, was not a pleasant experience at all.
Almost like he's trying to prove the devil. Because it was early on, and that was after he fell out of heaven.
Mhm.
He's hanging with the devil still. I mean, it's kind of like what I was thinking. And this is like, I already know what's going to happen, but I got to show you that I know what's going down.
Yeah.
Kind of like putting him in his place.
Yeah, and I think really as you look at the book of Job and you think that, okay, well, God wouldn't just do that. Yeah, He would. And I think that is indeed a theme that we're going to see as well, is that God He knows us and has confidence in us to the point that happens to us. Or that happens to us. And to think, I thought you loved me, you know what I'm saying? But the fact that He does love us and He knows us, and who knows whom He is saying, see what grace can do? That is a carnal, fallen creature that has been transformed by believing in me, and you see what that can do. We think, well, Lord, couldn't you have done it a different way? Really? But this, in the providence of God, is the way that it came about. And He knows exactly why. We may never, which is the irritant for us at times. It's the irritant for us. Job, it was an irritant to Job. And certainly it can be for us. But one of the things that Job doesn't deal with is the experience of suffering because we're not believers. In other words, living under the curse of life in this world. This world was cursed in the fall, after the flood. The curse was reinforced. And that curse has helped provide some of the restraints, some of the things that happen in the providence of God in this world that we end up getting caught in the middle of. Katrina is an example. We just celebrated, 10 years ago, Katrina almost got rid of New Orleans, which necessarily probably wouldn't have been a bad thing, But all that being said, there were Christians caught in Katrina, along with sinners caught in Katrina. Part of the providential curse of God placed upon the earth, that things happen all in His providence. He wasn't surprised by Katrina at all. But sometimes we get caught in those. That's really never addressed in the book. It's really about a believer. The book of Job is really about a believer. So that larger picture that we more often than not run into is never even addressed in the book. There's some insights for us, but the discussion is never about that. The discussion is about, did you sin, and therefore you deserve suffering, or did you not? That's the whole debate of the book of Job. Something else that we'll see is the attributes of God. And can't talk and spell it at the same time. The attributes of God. It's an order, by the way. And His power, His wisdom, His knowledge, and at the end of the book, His grace, His mercy. And some of that is even seen in chapter 1 and chapter 2, but It's kind of overarched with the sovereignty and the power and the justice of God. And we've already talked about it a little bit, that in the book, we'll look at the theme of how well God knows us. He knew Job. He knew the limits of Job. He knows the limits of us. Another theme that we'll see, we'll talk about, is limited, which equals skewed theology. These companions of Job had a limited understanding of God. And it skewed their understanding of their friend, Job. And it turned them from, instead of being comforters and strengths and supports, that limited, skewed theology turned them into some of the bitterest language used against this man. The only thing that might have been even more extreme was when Job's wife told him in chapter 3, why don't you just curse God and die? Thanks for the help. Maybe she had a good insurance policy on him. Who knows? I mean, you know. So, but that's one of the things that we'll see as we go through the book. As well as, you know, we're going to see Job's faith and glimpses by that into resurrection, into an afterlife. And probably one of the last things we really look at is how, you know, God answers prayer. And a lot of Job's prayers God didn't answer. Didn't answer. Because Job prayed to die, all the other things. God didn't do that. But we do see God's answer at the end of the book. Prayer. And even though when God answered Job's prayer, He still didn't give him, He didn't tell him why. He gave Job more in answer than Job ever could have dreamed of as he was going through this. The end of Job's life was virtually double what he had before this ever started. He even lived another probably 70 years or more. The Lord extended it, all these things He gave to him. But it's not recorded that He ever explained to him. Certainly, when by the time the writer, who probably was Moses, recorded it, God gave the backstory. But we don't know that Job ever got it, ever heard it, until he finally got into the presence of God. So, this is some of what we're going to look at as we go through the book. Questions, comments on any of this?
Well, I was just thinking, Job's wife, she went through the same thing that he did. Her losses, she lost her children too, and plus she had to watch her husband suffer. It doesn't say that she had any friends come.
Nope.
And doesn't say anything about what she did other than criticize him at one time, which she may just have been at the end of her rope, you know. Why is she not mentioned, do you think?
I have no clue. That's the simplest answer I can give you. I have no clue.
I mean, because really, I feel sorry for her.
Yeah. Yeah. And that certainly is the point of, you know, Job's wife. And she did. She lost all of her children.
Mm-hmm.
She lost all of her financial support. She certainly lost her standing in the community. Because what they said about Job, they would be saying about her as well.
Did she lose her faith too? And did she react to it the same way Job did?
You know, it seems from her response to Job that her faith was shaken at least as much as Naomi's was in the book of Ruth. As we talked about Naomi, he said, you don't even call me Naomi, call me Mara, and God has brought me back empty. I went out full, and he's done all these things to me. Sounds a lot like Job's wife here in this. And why she is not included, or why it's not elaborated, I couldn't tell you. Couldn't tell you.
She never even know her name, did you?
Nope. Just Job's wife is all we know. Not even a name. None of his kids' names. None of that. And it goes back to that, just the difference this book is from other books of Scripture. We have names, at least in Ruth, we had Ruth and Naomi and Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion and Boaz and whoever this other kinsman redeemer was, we didn't know his name. Had her kid's name and, all the Job. You got Job and Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar and Elihu and God. That's the only names given. And Satan, of course. So, none of that's given. Once again, one of the focus really seemed to be on what had happened physically to Job. And the background of it, just like with the idea of suffering in general, not addressed in the book. How all this affected Job's wife, other than the one statement, we have to. It's an assumption. It's the best that we can come up with. It's speculation. Good point with that. Good question. Other questions on any of these themes or ideas? Do I?
Told Brad I sound like Job's wife.
Should we even dare ask an elaboration for that?
That woman behind me is the.
The woman behind the man,
You know Brad's wife?
She suffers a lot.
She suffers a lot. Yeah, we can look at her and tell she really has a hard life, yeah.
Piggy party for
Yeah, Sherry has a hard life. Yeah, kind of like my wife. She has a really hard life,
But we suffer at times and never have an understanding of where,
Yeah.
why,
Yeah.
why me, and why not me.
Mhm.
How do I approach this? What do I show to those around me through this?
It is
I
because,
think it has a lot to do with the walk before.
yeah, it really does. And I think that idea of, how do I deal with this in me? But then how do I deal with it with other people that are around? Because people don't know how to interact with you if you're suffering. You have a diagnosis of cancer. Well, they'll never talk about it. It's like, I can't say to you, well, I'm sorry you have cancer. For some reason, they will shun you rather than talk about it. Or even other things that come up, people just don't, they are afraid. And then it does, put it on, how do I then, what do I project? Well, I can tell you what I feel like projecting is, this hurts! I don't like it.
And there's
And,
somebody out there that needs to hear that. That you maybe need to share that with somebody. I don't like this. This is happening to me, but, God's in control and He's going to take
And we need that validation. I was talking recently with someone, and part of the conversation was that they needed validation for what had happened to them. That yes, it was wrong, and yes, it hurt, and yes, they had a right to be upset and angry and all. Yeah, they had not been given that in some situations, and it really caused them some trouble because they did not know how to deal with what kept being pushed down inside, and they needed the validation. And there are times, and I think Job does help us because Job was very clear. He didn't hide it. He didn't hide it. He came out with it. He just said, this don't feel good, and I don't understand, and this hurts really bad, and I wish I'd never been born, and all this other stuff. And thinking about how do I project? What do I want other people to see in me? And Job did, along with that, show faith. Showed a determination, and I'm going to keep to my integrity, even though everybody around him said, why don't you just give in and give up? And to be able to keep your integrity when everybody else says you don't have any, that's a challenge in and of itself. And Job had to deal with that. So I really do think that, thinking about what is it that we project? How we deal with it inside, but also, what do we want other people to see? Oh, it doesn't bother me. Yeah, it really does. Say it. Along with saying it, say how your faith is handled. Is the balance to that. Because just to say it bothers me leaves someone will say, okay, well, where is your God? He's right here. Because as Job will say later on, even though the skin worms will devour my body, in my flesh I will see God. That's faith. That was a balancing to that. And I think sometimes keeping that balance is hard for us. It's just hard.
What is a good answer to a secular person when they ask you that?
Ask you what?
Answer to, where's your God?
And I would say he's right here. My God is with me, even though it doesn't look like it to you. He is with me. And I am going through this. And will come out on the other side. Ever how I come out on the other side, I will come out with God. Yeah, it's like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar came up to had them brought to the fiery furnace and said, look, dude, you either bow down when you hear the sound of the music, or you're going to burn. And those three Hebrews said, we're not even going to take time to answer you. Our God is able, but even if he doesn't, he'll deliver us from you anyway. Which just really ticked off Nebuchadnezzar. But yeah, that would be the response. He is with me. He can bring me through this totally victorious without it hurting, bothering me at all, or he cannot. But either way, I'm going to win. Would be the simple answer to give, depending upon the nature of the situation and the type of questions being asked. But yeah, it's a good point because the world does that. The world does that. Where's your God?
I think we have a tendency to do it to ourselves as well. Where is God?
Mm-hmm.
I'll share something. I was engaged to a man before Jason, about a year and a half, before I met Jason actually, and we were scheduled to be married, had the wedding dress, had the whole 9 yards, and he canceled. Good, godly man, and I couldn't understand it. And I begged God to not take that away from me. But he did.
Mm-hmm.
And when I met Jason, it was like, oh, he had something else planned for me. And I was getting in the way. So through that whole time, though, I was like, where is God?
Mm-hmm.
And he's waiting for me to pay attention and do what needed to be done.
And that's an excellent.
And I think that's how Job works.
Yeah, it's excellent. And this even goes back to the study we just had of Ruth. There was a nearer kinsman redeemer that should have been able to step up. But the Lord had it worked out providentially so that he didn't do it, he couldn't do it, and a better, who was Boaz, came up. And there are times that, in our life, here we have providence of God. In our life, we have situations that arise. And we look at it really in that short term. How it feels right now, how it looks right now, all these things. And that's normal because we're not God. And this is where we look at it. When God may have something over here, so far in the distance that we really can't see it, it's beyond the horizon. We can't see it. And he knows this is going to be better in his will. And he denies us this to bring us here. Sometimes we don't see it. We walk right over top of that and don't even see what he's done. But then again, there are times we do. And we realize in different situations, different circumstances, that point right there is a richness that we have in God that he knew we couldn't get without him doing this to us. It's kind of like, and we'll touch on this a little bit more as we get into the book. I encourage you to read the book by C.S. Lewis if you haven't read it already, The Problem of Pain. Short little book, and he talks about suffering. He talks about Christians hurting. And he brings, and I'll touch on this again, but he brings a wonderful example out. And I liken it like this. I'll give you some artwork. How do you like that? Rembrandt, step aside. This is how he doesn't do this, but he talks about it, and this is how I see it. As a Christian, we stand under the reign of God's love. It's just pouring out. You know, God's love, God so loved the world, and he especially loves us, and we experience that love. But there's a lot of times we have the little umbrellas up. And what those umbrellas of our will, our hard-heartedness, our hard-headedness, all whatever they may be, what those things do is keep more of the blessing of God from coming into our lives. And what God wants us to do is take down the umbrellas. Take them down so that I can help you experience more of me. And sometimes Lewis brings this out. It takes pain to do that. And we'll talk about the passage in Hebrews where it says, you know, God disciplines us. If God doesn't discipline you as one of his children, it's a pretty good indication that you're not one of his children. I mean, the writer to the Hebrews is pretty plain with that. And he said, our earthly fathers discipline us to help us, you know, do right. And really, when our kids do like we want them to do, it opens the doors for us to just pour out more love on them. The same way, God wants to pour out more love on us, but we've got the umbrellas up. And the rain just beats off of these. And he wants it to flow down into us. Pain helps us to get rid of some of these. It's one of those things that he uses to get rid of some of these so that we can experience even more. It puts us in a position to be even more in the middle of the downpour of life. And I thought that was just so significant when I read it. I encourage you to read that little book. It's a good little book. About 90-some pages, so it's not 90, 125, something like that. It's not bad at all. Do a selfie.
Please don't.
Yeah, you know. I don't know why anybody would want to do a selfie, period. But, you know. All right. So, and I've already kept you over time. But Job's going to be good. Job's going to be a good discussion. I encourage you really to look into chapter 1, because it'll take us a little while to get through this chapter 1. We're going to have some good discussions with this. Thank you to Eric and Kim for visiting with us today. I hope we haven't scared you off, that you'll be able to be back with us again.